Okay, today I was informed I should have used the plural on this. Title is Fakes, Mistakes, and Incorrect Evidence for Evolution. And my thought that came to my mind is lies don't often lead to the truth. So I just want to show you, I promised last week I was going to show you some falsehoods that have been foisted upon the public in the name of science. There we go. As always, our mission statement is to exalt our Lord Jesus Christ, teach the Bible, equip the saints, and to tell the world. So this is a book by Dr. Henry Morris. It's called The Long War Against God, and I just highlighted one portion of it. You know, it's the theory of evolution is something that didn't emerge out of the blue in the 1800s. It came to us right from the beginning, and it was the first sin where Satan tempted Adam and Eve to seek divinity and self-control, to not be bound by the one law that God gave them: don't eat the fruit of the tree. And so in our disobedience, that has been inherited and passed down to all the people. And Henry Morris, in his book, traced all of the outcomes of Darwinism that I've been going through. So I title this one, Scientists Behaving Badly. The problem is that you ask the question, you'll see this presentation and you'd say, well, why would scientists do such things? And my answer is because they're human. And what they desire is fame and fortune. And that's the same thing that drives humanity's secular world is fame and fortune, not reverence to our Almighty God. So I want to hook up evolution today to the lie detector and see if we can determine the truth by looking at some of the cases where people are trying to substantiate evolution, to substantiate Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and you'll see what they did. So I'll skip over that one. So let me jump to the first subtopic. One is the thing that they have to explain is the origin of life. And so the origin of life, I've got this fancy picture of these smoking chimneys under the ocean. That's one of the myriad different theories that people have proposed how life came about. I found this little cartoon. It was really interesting. It basically gives you the quick story of what they tell the kids in the textbooks, teach them what the origins of life were. So nobody really knows what happened 4.6 billion years ago, but the Earth was formed. It came out, and we don't really know. And then it was molten, and it cooled off, and then there was a lot of volcanic activity and everything. But there was no oxygen, and the fact there was no oxygen allowed the polymers that were in the early Earth to coalesce together in some sort of a giant chemical reaction, and those polymers formed the chemicals that self-arranged themselves. And then we have these two scientists in the 50s, Dr. Miller and his student Urey, and they performed an experiment, and they got some amino acids. And you remember from a couple of times back, amino acids are the building blocks of DNA and all of the proteins. And then we come up with the fossil record with the dead animals, and that's supposed to be the story, and that's what they tell the kids. And so I took a look, and this is well documented, and I put this little angry symbol. I see this angry textbook up at the top. I put that symbol up there to represent things that are still in our textbooks today. If you go and you look at the Canal Valley Unified School District textbooks, you'll find this experiment is one of the things that they teach kids, and it's been repudiated, as you'll see, even by the authors themselves. So in the 50s, 52, Urey and Miller and Urey got together and they thought up how could early life start. So they say, okay, well, there was hot water boiling the oceans, and we had chemicals like methane and ammonia and hydrogen, and they had lightning. So maybe lightning caused the formation of these chemicals to come together, and so they built this apparatus out of glass and ran the spark and ran the gases in there and boiled the water. And then after a few days, they came and collected the material that was formed down in the cold trap. And so they found a few amino acids. And this was reported to the press. And of course, the press ran with it. And news reports were, this is life in a test tube. Life was created in a test tube. And so the evolutionary community jumped on board, and this became one of the foundational experiments to prove evolution and that life could be created from non-life. But did it? You know, and this is like Paul Harvey. Now the rest of the story. In actuality, the Miller-Urey experiment produced just a few. It produced a tar-like substance, a black tar. And it did have a few amino acids in it that is also used by life, but it had a lot of other materials that weren't associated with life. And it had no proteins. There were no amino acids that were formed into a protein chain. And as time went on, the people who are earth scientists, they have studied other factors and looked for information of what was the early atmosphere on the earth. And today, the theory is that the early earth follows the evolutionary paradigm had carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. So they repeated the Miller-Urey experiment with those gases and chemicals, and lo and behold, no amino acids were produced. And there's also the problem that amino acids actually have a symmetry. They either call left-handed, where the hydrogen is going to the left, or they're right-handed, where the hydrogen is going to the right. And the life is created basically by left-handed amino acids, and the amino acids that were formed in the Urey experiment, Miller-Urey experiment, were all half and half, so that didn't conform. And years later, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey made the confession that when they actually thought about it, the formation of life is so complex that it's just too complex and too great. It's too hard for us to imagine what happened. And so these are one of the icons. They call them icons of evolution. These are one of the things that the pillars that evolution is built on, and they're used to convince your kids. Like I said, this is in the textbooks of all of the public schools. So if you could play the first video, this kind of gives you. This is from Ben Stein's Expelled.
What were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide minimal life function. If that's really true, then I think it's almost inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
Huh? How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable, roughly 1 in a trillion, 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 trillion.
Let all of life choose a million, a trillion, trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. Luckily, some serious scientific minds have figured out a way to beat the odds.
Directed panspermia.
When faced with the overwhelming problem of the origin of life, Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick proposed this theory, that life was seeded on Earth, which basically means aliens did it. Crystals? Aliens? I thought we were talking about science, not science fiction.
Okay, so let's go on to the next topic. So that's the origin of life. Then we have the fossils, the little cartoon. That was one of the things that showed the fossil record is certainly proving the theory of evolution. And there's been a lot of scientists that have dug things out of the earth and then speculated on what they might be. And it always has to do with confirming the theory of evolution. This man is Jonathan Wells. He's a professor at UC Berkeley, my home. He wrote a book, Icons of Evolution, and he went through in great detail how the different ideas have been tested and found to be wanting. It's the most important book ever written about evolution controversy, and it goes through step by step. This is another professor at Berkeley that wrote that. So we have Charles Darwin and his famous tree of life. This is what the evolutionists say. But this is what we find. We don't find any of these branches. All of those branches are missing links. Those brownish red branches represent missing links between the first life form that was a single cell creature that branched out to the trees, the insects, the mammals, and the invertebrates, and finally humans. But when we look in the fossil record, we just see individual carcasses of dead animals. We don't see any animals changing from one form to another. And there's been a lot of speculation about different transitional fossils. So you're trying to find something that's half one thing, half another. And so they've come up with this birds 1 and 2. And then we have this animal here called a tic-tac. It's like an alligator, and it has some strange forms. The coelacanth fish and Archaeopteryx and Archaeoraptor, those have all been claimed to be the missing links and are used in the school books to convince kids that evolution is true. But Archaeopteryx is really, when they looked at it, it has all of the features of a perching bird. The reason that they claim that the bird is a transitional fossil, it has serrations on its beak, so they say those are the formation of teeth. Other animals have that, other birds have that, geese have that, and there's an animal bird called an oryx that has that. And it has claws on its wings rather than its feet, and other birds have that. There are some birds in South America today that have claw-like things on their wings. But they misinterpreted that. And so really, when you look at all of the features, the lungs are from the birds, the wishbone, the pelvis, the feet, everything, it's a bird. It just has a couple of unusual features. And then there's this one that's actually a hoax. This is from China. It was published in the National Geographic. It has to be true, right? They went through and had a cover saying this is a flying dinosaur, and but when they looked at this specimen in detail, this is the picture on the left, the volumetric model. You see all of the pieces, and then when they went through and identified it carefully with the measurements that can tell what kind of animal it is, you see that it's a mixture of a reptile and a bird kind of glued together. So the people who are pushing this, and this is the man who discovered this, the Chinese gentleman on the left, he was the one that discovered with great scientific technique that this was somebody had made a fake. And so they call this thing a dinosaur with wings. That's the cover of National Geographic, but it's really been refuted. They call it the Piltdown chicken because it's a hoax. Okay, then we come to embryology. So in the search for trying to substantiate Darwin's theory in his book, 1859, published Origin of the Species, there were people all over the world that were trying to substantiate it. So what they did, there was a gentleman in Germany, a professor, a very noteworthy professor, and he studied the embryos of some animals. And he studied a fish and a chicken and a pig and a cat and a human. And he said that the embryos all looked alike. After the egg was developed to a certain extent, you have an embryo, and as that develops, it turns into the animal. But he said they all looked alike, so that was proof of evolution that everything as it developed looked like everything else. And his name was Ernst Haeckel. And this is one of the, again, another one of the things that are in textbooks today. It may not be attributed to him, it might be attributed to somebody else, but the same idea. And so as time went on, it was highly disputed, and finally this embryologist named Michael Richardson, he took photographs. So at the top are Hinckel's drawings of what the embryos look like, and down at the bottom, the fish, the salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, and human. He actually took photographs of those embryos at the same stage of development. They look nothing alike. So he was outed, Ernst Haeckel was outed, and finally he had confessed that he had the pictures drawn. He first tried to blame somebody else. He said he had the pictures of the embryos drawn by somebody else, and that artist made the mistake, and so he was duped by the artist. But when they finally traced it down, when he had to name who the artist was that drew the pictures, he had to confess it was himself. So he was the one that drew the pictures. Okay, if you could, this is video number 2 from the book Icons of Evolution by Jonathan Wells.
Another icon I wrote about was a set of drawings made by 19th century German Darwinist Ernst Haeckel of vertebrate embryos. Now, Darwin knew that the fossil evidence was not particularly helpful to his theory. So in Darwin's own opinion, the best evidence for his theory was what we see in embryos. And he believed and wrote in The Origin of Species that embryos in the same class or group are most similar in their early stages and become different only as they develop. In fact, he thought that the early stages show us the form of the ancestor in its original form. Ernst Haeckel made some drawings based on this idea that embryos are most similar in their earliest stages and become different only later on. And these drawings became quite famous. They show, typically in the first row, embryos that look almost identical. And these are embryos supposedly of fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, and various mammals. And then as they develop, these embryos become more and more different until we see the actual adult fish, salamander, turtle, and so on. Many modern biology textbooks include Haeckel's drawings as evidence for evolution. I was surprised at how many I saw. And yet, Haeckel faked the drawings. Some of his own colleagues, embryologists, accused him of fraud during his own life. The reason his drawings misrepresent the evidence, actually there are 3 reasons. First of all, the embryos that he portrays as being virtually identical are not. A good embryologist can see the differences, and actually in 1997, British biologist Michael Richardson and his colleagues published a now famous article in Anatomy and Embryology comparing Haeckel's drawings to actual embryos. and showing that Haeckel faked the data. The other thing that's wrong with Haeckel's drawings is that he selected very carefully. He has 8 rows in his classic drawing. 4 of them are mammals. But he excluded various vertebrates that don't fit the pattern. For example, he doesn't have sharks. He doesn't have lampreys or eels, which are very different. He uses a salamander instead of a frog, because a frog doesn't look like that at all. And among the mammals, he leaves out the platypus and the kangaroo, which are different divisions of the mammal group. And he only includes mammals that happen to look very similar. So we call it cherry picking. He cherry picked the embryos he chose to show, and then he distorted them to make them look more similar than they really are. And for me as a scientist, the worst thing about Haeckel's drawings is that he totally leaves out the earliest stages of embryo development. The embryos that he portrayed as being the earliest are actually midway through development. When you go back and look at the earliest stages of fishes and amphibians and birds and so on, mammals, they look very, very different. So instead of early similarity developing into later differences, we have early differences converging midway on certain similarities, which he exaggerated, and then diverging again as the embryos develop. It doesn't fit Darwin's pattern at all. In fact, if you were to follow Darwin's logic, you'd have to say the different classes of vertebrates had different ancestors, and then for some unknown reason become similar halfway through development and then become dissimilar again. So the logic and the evidence don't fit. So after I wrote about Haeckel's embryos in 2000, the pattern among people who were critical of my book became quite typical. First, they started quietly taking the drawings out of the textbooks. Okay, Haeckel's embryos are hard to find in textbooks now, although there's actually still some that have them. Or they replaced Haeckel's drawings with redrawn versions, or in some cases with actual photographs. But the photographs are only of those embryos and those stages that happen to fit the Darwinian story. So the evidence is still being widely misrepresented in textbooks. At the same time, I was personally vilified by many of my critics as a liar, as being stupid. I'm actually trained as an embryologist, and yet they said, obviously, I didn't learn anything from my Berkeley PhD because I didn't know anything about embryology. Interestingly enough, Jerry Coyne, who is a fly geneticist, when he attacked my book, he attacked me primarily, as far as the science goes, on my portrayal of vertebrate embryos, my own specialty. But perhaps the most egregious attack on me and my credibility came with a film called Flock of Dodos by evolutionary biologist turned filmmaker Randy Olson. And in the film, he has me on camera as saying that the embryos misrepresent the truth and the textbooks still have them. And then he tries to show in subsequent scenes that the embryos really are not in the textbooks and that no biologist takes them seriously anymore. Well, he knew at the time, because Icons of Evolution actually cites 8 textbooks with Haeckel's embryos, he knew that what he was saying wasn't true. And he was later then confronted with other textbooks, more recent ones, that still have Haeckel's embryos in them. And he decided to go ahead with the film anyway because he liked the story he was telling. But it has absolutely nothing to do with the truth. The truth is, Haeckel's embryos were used in textbooks all over the place for a century after they were known to be fake. And I think this is an outrageous example of how some Darwinists misrepresent the evidence to prove their theory.
So he was attacked by everyone for outing this obvious lie. And he's an embryologist, a molecular biologist at UC Berkeley, and his specialty is in embryology. So these people in the newspaper would attack him saying he knew nothing about nothing about embryology. Now we come to another one I mentioned last week. This is the supposed whale evolution. That's supposed to be one of the cornerstones of evolutionary theory proof. And you see three animals, Pachycetus, Ambulocetus, and Rhodocetus. Those are supposed to be the transitions because the whales are mammals, not fish. And so the early ancestors of the whales had to be mammals. So they came from the land, went into the sea to become whales. So I'll show you this video. This is one from the movie Living Fossils by Dr. Carl Werner and his wife, Debbie.
Whales are magnificent creatures, capable of holding their breath for over an hour and diving to over 1,000 feet deep. But where did they come from? Scientists who support evolution suggest whales evolved from a land mammal. For them, the fossil evidence is so convincing, the evolution of whales is offered as one of the best fossil proofs for the theory of evolution. However, scientists who oppose evolution argue that this fossil evidence is unreliable. Darwin thought that whales might have evolved from bears. In The Origin of Species, he wrote, "In North America, the black bear was seen swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale." Modern evolution scientists have abandoned Darwin's idea of a bear evolving into a whale.
So the modern evolutionists have abandoned Darwin's bear-whale theory, but whales are very significant to even the present-day evolutionary community, because they believe this is one of the places where they have the best ancestral chart. Is that right?
Yes, they would say the evolution of ground mammal to a whale is the best evidence they have. And I then decided to systematically look into this. And I got the evolution charts for how this evolution would occur. And I started asking questions. The first thing that struck me is, why does everybody have a different animal that evolved into whales? For example, the California Academy of Sciences says it was a hyena that became a whale. A different museum says it was a cougar-like animal that became a whale. Another one says it's a wolf-like mammal. Darwin says it was a bear. That seemed odd. Well, which one was it that became a whale? Then we started to decipher the charts and say, show us the fossils here for this animal. And we realized that the charts reflected something quite different from reality. The scientists actually had created the fins and the tail, the whale's tail, on the animal called Rhodocetus. And we were interviewing him on camera, and this revelation became known. It was stunning.
This is a powerful segment from Evolution, the Grand Experiment. And I just want our folks to look at this, because when they go to a museum and they see these charts, they don't necessarily have to believe everything they read.
Don't believe anything unless you can see the fossils.
Scientists at the University of Michigan suggest whales evolved from this cat-like animal because of the similarities in the teeth, while scientists at the California Academy of Sciences believe this hyena-like animal evolved into a whale because its teeth are similar to some extinct whales. Biologists in Japan suggest whales evolved from a hippopotamus-like animal based on similarities in the DNA. Detractors of the theory ask, if whale evolution is so clear, and if the fossil record is so abundant, why can't evolution scientists agree upon which land mammal changed into a whale? There is great excitement in the scientific community over the discovery of a few important missing links between a land mammal and modern whales.
But what's good about these particular fossil whale specimens is that they do show us intermediates in the evolution of whales. And we don't often get fossil intermediates, so we can actually trace the development of characters. Say, for example, the evolution of swimming in whales. We don't often have that opportunity.
They have a big exhibit on it in Michigan. I was just there. They have all these things just sitting out there. I mean, they're all there. I mean, you really have to be blind or 3 days dead not to see the transition among these. You have to not want to see it.
As shown in this diagram from the University of Michigan Natural History Museum, Ambulocetus is one of the important transitional fossils in whale evolution. It is thought by some to be a walking whale.
Just in the last 5 or 10 years, we've had some remarkable discoveries of fossil whales. And in fact, there have been discoveries that have indicated that fossil whales had feet and actually walked on the land.
Frankly, I don't know why they could call that creature a whale. I have never seen a walking whale, and I've never seen a pig that flies. And they suggested some of these creatures were intermediate. Frankly, I just don't believe it. They believe that because they want to believe it.
Recently, some evolution scientists have backed off the assertion that Ambulocetus was an ancestor of modern whales because its eyes are high up on the head, like an alligator's eyes, quite dissimilar from whales and land mammals.
Ambulocetus may be on a slight sideline, and we think that mostly because it's very strange. It has its eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale. But mostly the eyes up on the top of the head seems like an unusual specialization. Maybe it's not on the main line.
Evolution scientists claim the most spectacular intermediate fossil in whale evolution is Rhodocetus, an animal with 4 legs, a whale's tail called a fluke, and flippers. It would swim using its widened tail fluke like a modern whale, but it had 4 legs like a land mammal. A perfect transitional fossil between land mammals and aquatic mammals, just as Darwin predicted.
The fossil whale that appears a little bit later is Rhodocetus, and this animal had large tail vertebrae that indicate there were lots of room for muscle attachment. So here we see the beginning of the type of locomotion that's characteristic of the modern whale, using just the tail flukes for propulsion and not using the hind limbs.
We have a complete modern whale-type structure in Rhodocetus. There are not many modifications from Rhodocetus to the modern whale other than changes in size of the structures.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy? Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent.
That's unbelievable, Carl. Absolutely unbelievable that you went to the man who made the drawing, put the flippers and the tail on Rhodocetus, not from any evidence, but from his assumption, and all the other scientists read his things as if it's the gospel truth.
And it collapsed during the interview.
And as soon as you show it's an assumption, there really is no evidence at all.
The whole thing collapsed.
What makes people want to believe or think in the first place that a whale had to come from a land animal?
Well, whales and land mammals are both mammals, or warm-blooded, and so they have thought in the past that maybe a land mammal could become a whale through volition, hoping to get a body part that it needed to swim or whatever. But that life doesn't work that way. The only way you could get a body part for swimming would be by an accident, and it would have to be a monumental accident of letters of DNA, 900 of them, being inserted into the DNA of the reproductive cells. When you look at the odds of this happening, it's unbelievable. Let me just say that.
This goes to a cardinal belief of Darwin's, doesn't it? That through volition, animals could change from one animal to another?
Yes, and Darwin was wrong on this. He was wrong on use, he was wrong on disuse, he was even wrong on the idea of adaptation. Scientists today, biologists who believe in evolution, have rejected this idea that you could adapt by a need in the environment.
Okay, and so this is in all of the textbooks. Whale evolution, you can go look online if you go to UC Berkeley or you go to UCLA, any university that's teaching today, it's got whale evolution as one of the major proofs of evolution. And so the Rhodocetus was found in the the early 1990s, 92. It's on display in University of Michigan, American History Museum, New York, London, Berkeley. 8 years after the admission, or now it's 10 years after the admission, those displays and the people are coming through those museums. It's in the textbooks. It hasn't been removed. And Phil Gingrich, he added that he imagined that there were a whale's tail and the webbed feet, but it hasn't been taken out of any of the museums. Okay, so let's go to apes to man. This is the big one, okay? How did we become us? You know, we have the human, we have the ape, and we have the make-believe. And as I say, Time magazine believes it. It tells us how apes became human, how we became human. It shows a baby and a monkey, how man began. All of the anthropologists agree. The New York Times agrees. A front page article, New York Times, in December 22nd, 1912. Darwin's theory is proven true. So you can take that to the bank. Who could dispute the New York Times? And it was so amazing that they had another one when they found a man. In the Piltdown Man, the human race was born, had further evidence, 1931. So the lie continues. And what is Piltdown Man is now recognized as one of the most spectacular and longest enduring frauds in the history of modern science. There's the San Diego Union reporting Piltdown Man named hoax, jolts science. This is another one. The forger was found, fraud reported in 1953. So from 1912, 1953, 41 years it took them to find the truth and actually report it. So Piltdown Man is in, yes?
That was the same year that Crick found the deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yeah.
The double helix. I don't think that's coincidental.
And so they discovered the forger. And I found this was interesting. Maybe we just want to believe. The mystery of Piltdown Man takes another step towards conclusion, but the story's most important lesson is maybe it's about science itself. Maybe it's about the science that we're trusting in these people that are making these predictions that are suppositions based on, you know, this was a person who actually forged the material. They took the skull of the human being, and they glued it together. Again, they put it together painstakingly with the jaw of an ape, and they put it in iodine to stain it to make it look old, and that's what they passed off as a Piltdown man. Now we have an earlier example. Here's another half man, half monkey transition found in Java by Eugene Dubois, and he called it Java Man, and they had a few bones and some skulls, and actually he conceded years later, 49, I have a little typo there, 49 years later he discovered that, or he concluded that it wasn't actually a transition, because he admitted he withheld other evidence that had parts of thigh bones from apes from the same area. So he was deducing this was a man, but actually when he did more discovery, he actually refuted his own claim. So ape-like skull cap, human-like thighs. In 1940, so this was from 1894 to 1940, they found admitted they found 2 human skulls in the same area with the thigh bone. So now it's regarded as a hoax, and this is still 49 years later. It's still in the textbooks, the angry textbook up there. This is one in the USA. This is Nebraska Man, ape man of the Western world. Scientists construct new million-year-old link from a tooth found in a farm. First evidence of arthropods in the United States. Unfortunately, Nebraska Man discovered in 1922, all they did was had a tooth, and they drew all these pictures, a single molar. And then when they fully examined it in great detail, Nebraska Man turned out to be not an ape, not a man. It actually turned out to be a pig. So this one tooth was from the pig, reported 5 years later after they have all these pictures with camels, and they had the male and the female, and they were building fire from a pig tooth. Lucy, you've probably, how many have heard of Lucy, the half ape, half human? That was in Ethiopia in 1974. It supposedly had bipedal motion, meaning it walked upright. It wasn't a knuckle dragger. And there was the display of the bones that they found, or a reproduction probably of that. They probably have the original bones somewhere locked up, so you can't get to them, but this is a reproduction. And American Museum of Natural History, they have it. Unfortunately, when you look at detail, as people have done, you have many, many differences. The shape, what they call the bowl of the pelvis, is different. The apes are squished together, where the humans are flattened out. You can see the teeth of the chimpanzee. It's long and narrow, sort of like a dog or something, more dog-like. And then the humans are arched. So the teeth are wrong. The rib cages are wrong. And then when they looked at the bones and everything and put them together, this animal had very long arms and had very short legs, so it was not human. And it's 3'9" tall. So they concluded that Lucy is really just a variation on an ape, not a human being. And even Richard and Mary Leakey, you've heard of the Leakeys, you probably know them personally. Right. The Leakeys, after, when they were famous for all their anthropological discoveries, but in the end, they're when they got very old and were asked to verify evolution, they say, if pressed about man's ancestry, I'd have to unequivocally say that we have a huge question mark. If further pressed, I would state that there is more evidence to suggest an abrupt arrival of man rather than a gradual process. That's Richard and Mary said all of these trees of life with their branches of our ancestors, that's a lot of nonsense. So even they, years later, when they were older and not embroiled in the action, had time to think about it. Everything they synthesized, everything that they had seen and read from other discoveries, they came to those two conclusions. Neanderthals. Oh, Neanderthals are wonderful. They discovered the Neanderthals even before the Java man. And they were found, they're called Neanderthals because they were found first in the Neander Valley in Germany. And they found these brutish kind of people, had very thick bones and low eyebrows. You've seen the commercial, the Geico commercial, so you know what a... But when they did a thorough investigation, first of all, the Neanderthals weren't just in Germany. They were all over Europe. They were in Czechoslovakia. They were even in Russia. They found Neanderthal evidence. Lived in caves. You know, they didn't have to build a house. They just used a cave. And but they found that they buried their dead. They wore jewelry. They had artifacts of jewelry buried with some of the dead bodies. They had flowers in the graves. They had found musical instruments in the Neanderthal caves. They looked like they had religious rites. There were certain things with bones and rocks that were set up in patterns. They had broken bones that were set. They knew how to set their own broken bones. So if somebody, you know, they were fighting and then somebody had a broken leg, they knew how to set that because they could tell from the bone regrew. It was set from where it was broken back to where it was, and the bone regrew. They used stone tools. They had fur clothing, lived in caves. Their brain is 13% larger than our brain. 13%. And they show evidence that Neanderthals mated with regular human beings. So Neanderthal is just, you know, it's just a different, you know, like the pygmies in Africa, the very short people. And they have very tall people in China, you know, Yao Ming, and we have some very examples of very tall cultures in Africa with tribes of tall people. So they're just different people. They're all people. You can mate together and have offspring. So the proof of human beings, Neanderthal man, Java man, Piltdown man, Nebraska man, Ramblisicus, the orangutan, and then Lucy, the knuckle-dragging monkey. You know, it's all just a bunch of bones that they've put together, and they have these fanciful stories because they want to prove, like Dr. Gish in that little video said, they want to believe evolution is true, so they're trying to find evidence. That's the opposite. Scientists are supposed to find the evidence and construct what happened. No, they have a theory, and they're trying to, as a prosecutor, find the evidence that matches the guilty or innocence of evolution. And then the final one, the final straw is monkeys to man. We have the claim that 98.4% identical DNA. And the monkeys, we studied the DNA. There's 3.2 billion bases pairs in the human. Chimp has 3.6 billion bases pairs, so there's 12% more DNA, but yet it's still 98% the same. So I'm going to play this video. This is our good friend Richard Dawkins, and he's going to explain to you exactly how this 98.4% is true with a big diagram.
Humans and chimpanzees parted company in evolution about 6 million years ago from a common ancestor. The human genome and the chimpanzee genome have both been completely sequenced, and this is a small section of part of the genome that matches. If we follow along here, human-chimp, go all the way along here, all the way along here, they're all identical. Differences between the two are indicated by a little man who is in fact Svante Pääbo, a very distinguished Swedish geneticist now working in Germany. It's a little game of find Pääbo. Follow along this row here, chimp, human, identical, identical, identical. There's a difference. Walk along, walk along, walk along, all the same, identical, no difference at all between the human and the chimpanzee, exactly the same, exactly the same. Now we see another difference there. A versus G. Walk along, walk along, walk along. And there are no more differences in that whole row. Almost all of the human genome and the chimpanzee genome is identical. A tiny number of differences account for all the really quite large differences that we see between humans and chimpanzees.
Okay, so now we're going to go to, you can just play the next one. You can just play the last, this is the last video. This is from Canada. Some friends, creation, they believe in creation in Canada. Some people.
You've probably heard it said that chimps and humans have almost identical DNA. In fact, the number most people have heard is that chimps and humans are 98.4% genetically identical. Surely we evolved from a common ape ancestor. The 98% myth has been running around for decades, being used to sway honest people into believing the evolutionism myth. It blows me away that anti-creationists would use this argument, as even a junior high school student can refute it. Anybody can look up things on the internet and see for themselves the various lengths of genomes of organisms. Now, if you do this, you'll notice that the chimpanzee DNA is 12% longer than the human DNA. Wait a minute, 12% longer, but it's 98.4% identical? Does anybody else detect a math error here? But let's give them their 98.4% identical for a second. What does that mean? Let's give evolution the advantage and use the smaller of the two genomes. The human genome, which is a measly 3.2 billion base pairs long. 98.4% identical means it's 1.6% difference. Well, 1.6% of 3.2 billion is 51,200,000. This is how many changes there are between chimps and humans. As little as one change in the wrong place in your DNA is lethal. How, pray tell, do you expect to make tens of millions of changes without killing the organism? Short answer is, you can't. But let's assume that we are 98% identical to the chimp. So what? The differences between apes and humans are far, far beyond the physical and genetic. When was the last time you saw a chimpanzee doing calculus? Building and working on machines. Creating artwork. Making and playing musical instruments. Guerrilla warfare? This is all just as silly as a chimpanzee talking about technical genetics. Furthermore, it turns out the 98% myth got its start in the mid-1970s, long before actual DNA comparison could be made. This 98% figure was arrived at using a technique known as reassociation kinetics. Basically, they'd take a strand of DNA, split it down the middle into RNA strands, then mix these strands between humans and chimps, and time how quickly or slowly the human and chimp strands joined together. The faster they joined, the more identical the strands were assumed to be. We now know this method is hugely unreliable, but yet the 98% figure now stuck, becoming a sort of gold standard to which all future studies tried to align. Today, after actual sequencing the human and chimpanzee DNA into their string of letters of A, T, C, and G, we can now do a letter-by-letter comparisons to see just how identical chimps and humans really are. And we've already shown how it's mathematically impossible to arrive at 98% identical, yet many studies allegedly come to this figure anyway. So how did they come up with this number? Well, the researchers start by removing huge portions of the DNA. Usually more than 98% of the DNA is ignored, and they focus on only the portions of the DNA that provide the code for building proteins. Of that less than 2%, they then very carefully select portions. For example, they will pick a gene that they know both chimps and humans have. Amazing! The single genes are almost identical. Well, no guff. The transmission of my 1986 chick magnet is the same transmission that was in the General Lee. This is because the chick magnet and the General Lee both had a common designer, Dodge Motor Vehicle Company. In like fashion, identical or near identical genes in two organisms can be because of a common designer, not necessarily a common ancestor. But it gets even more scandalous when you dig into the technical details of the DNA comparisons. Let's lay out a chimp DNA and a human DNA strand beside each other. Well, first off, you only have 4 letters to choose from. That means you automatically have a 25% match. So suddenly, 98% isn't anywhere near as impressive, as even the evolutionists have alleged that you are at least 50% genetically identical to the banana. Even comparing the same genes, or different portions of the DNA, laying out the 2 strands side by side, the researchers will notice gaps in the alignments. Because evolution is assumed, then it is assumed that these gaps are insertions of information into, or deletions of information from, the DNA. They call these indels for short for insertions and deletions. These indels are ignored in the studies, basically removed. So the only differences documented are the actual letters, which are different. These indels might only be 1 or 2 letters long, or they could be tens of thousands of letters long. That's right. To allege a match between 2 strands of DNA, the researchers could remove completely huge chunks of DNA containing thousands of letters, and they don't count that as a difference between the 2 strands. Then there's the issue of orphan genes. These are genes that are only found in one specific organism. Chimpanzees have hundreds of them. Humans have hundreds of them. These orphan genes represent a 0% match between humans and chimps. These orphan genes are also ignored when comparing chimps and humans. Well, given all this latitude for what to include and exclude, it's not difficult to see how one can arrive at the mathematically impossible figure of 98% genetic similarity between chimps and humans. Given the same freedoms, I'm quite certain that you could also arrive at the conclusion that humans are 98% identical to the banana. Ugh. When one actually takes into account all of the DNA, the figure of matching chimp-human DNA rapidly drops down to as low as 70%, depending on how you do your comparisons. Remembering that the 0 point on our scale starts at 25%, not 0, you can start to grasp the difference. The differences between humans and chimps are great indeed, and the differences do not support common ancestry. The 98% myth is a downright scandalous myth. Don't let it make a monkey out of you. Chimps and humans are radically different, of which we are told in Genesis that only mankind was created in God's image. God didn't come in chimpanzee form to die for the chimpanzees. He came in human form to die in place of sinful humans like myself and you. He died in our place, then rose from the dead to show us he was the way to eternal life. That same person said that in order to obtain eternal life, you must be born again. Now, if he rose from the dead, then he obviously knows something we don't. I'd pay close attention to what he said and heed his warnings. Being born again is simply believing that Jesus rose from the dead, acknowledging that you've sinned, and asking him for forgiveness, and he will give you eternal life. Why don't you do that today?
Okay, in conclusion, I just wanted to say that the truth makes a fool out of Richard Dawkins, it made a monkey out of him. So overall, the actual DNA similarities compared to human genome you know, is stated in scientific studies to be about 70%. But the 98.4% is in all of the textbooks that the kids are reading. So they don't hear that. They don't see this movie. They love this movie when I play this movie for them. So my conclusion, to God is the glory. Thank you so much. I just wanted to tell you how much fun it was to be here. This is my last presentation of the year, so I'm hoping to do something else in the future. But I want to say I've had so much fun doing it. It's such a pleasure to meet with you on Sunday morning, and I hope you've learned something. Thank you. God bless.